Good morning. It is good to be here. Let me pray and then we'll get started. Lord, thank you for this day and this chance just to enjoy cooler weather, to enjoy some fellowship, some time together, worshiping, hearing from your word, being together. Lord, we need you. We need to be different people. We want to be changed and remade in your image, and you've given us your story, your word to help with that. So I pray you speak to me and through me. We want to hear today what you have for us so we can follow you more closely. So we give you this time. Amen. Well, we have been talking about a lot of things over the, how's that? That's a good intro. We've been talking about a lot of things. Over the past few weeks, we're still going through Matthew. If it's your first time here, we've been working through Matthew really for about a year. We're about halfway through it, so we've been going really slowly through it. Today, we're going to cover much of chapter 13, so we're going to cover a bigger chunk of it. But I do want to give some context. Going way back to June, we talked about the disciples being sent. And then there was this kind of warning from Jesus. It's going to be hard. You're going to be rejected. That kind of thing. And then there was this stuff in Jesus' own story where he gives an example after example of his own rejection and betrayals and that kind of thing. So he isn't just saying it. He's living it, right? In fact, Hebrews 4:15 says this: we do not have a high priest who is unable. I don't have a slide for this, so don't go hunting for it, Austin. We do not have a high priest who is unable to empathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way, just as we are, yet he did not sin. We just sang about Jesus providing our needs, Jesus being faithful, that kind of thing. And there is a big wave of theology that says that means he's going to provide everything, including a life of wealth and comfort. But that isn't Jesus' life, right? Jesus didn't live that life. And there are good things in life, and it's good to enjoy those things. But Jesus is faithful. He's experienced a life like ours, which is full of joys and hardships. And we've been talking about his example of that, right? That he's sending his disciples out, and just so you know, it's going to be hard. And let me remind you of some things in my own life, his own life, that were hard. That's kind of the story of the book of Matthew. We're going to cover a lot of parables today and some just a lot of text, so hopefully it isn't too much. I want to start with these two visions of the kingdom, kind of near the end of the chapter, Matthew 13:44 and 45 through 46. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. And then a similar parable or story or image. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of a fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. To me, this speaks of clarity. Right? We're always kind of looking for, like, what's the most important thing? We have, throughout the years, talked about, because as much of a cheerleader as Michelle is, she's also going to be kind of morbid. So, like, if I die, what are you going to do? And, like, if there's a fire, what are you going to save from the house? And it used to be the photos, right? The photo album is what you saved, because everyone had their record of their lives and their family's lives, their family history in hard copy. So that was the thing you're going to save. Like, after the people are saved, and maybe the dog, depends on who you ask, but it's the photo album. Now, you know, unless you're old, you don't have a lot of photos to save. We have boxes of loose photos, but we don't have many recent hard copies of photos. Everything's in the cloud. So in a case of fire, save the cloud first, right? That's what we need to do, is go get the cloud from the back room, right? Wherever it is, gather it up. It's kind of amorphous, right? And save the cloud. So what are you going to save? Life is difficult. And there are just lots of times when we just lack clarity, right? Like, what's the most important thing? And we have all these sometimes competing values, competing ethics. Sometimes it feels like scriptural teaching is competing. Like, how do I make decisions in certain moments? It can be really difficult. Life can be hard, just trying to figure things out. That's why one reason why we like a good action movie, right? Like, I'll stand by this. At least once a year, I'll watch the entire Mission Impossible series, because it's chef's kiss of a series, right? It's just great stuff. And one thing I like about it is the moral clarity, right? Like, Ethan, knows what to do. And we see these movies with like the people who are in charge of guarding the president. They know exactly what to do. My job is to protect the president. You seem like a threat, eliminate the threat, job done. It's nice and clean and easy, right? We are against killing people, just to be clear. But the clarity is something that we lack often, right? Just like, what's the most important thing to do? Oliver Wendell Holmes Sr., who lived in the 1800s, said this. We have this quote: "For the simplicity on this side of complexity, I wouldn't give you a fig. But for the simplicity on the other side of complexity, for that I would give you anything I have." So what does that mean? If you've been in a period of life or in your job, whatever, where you're dealing with a hard issue, you're looking for a way through all these competing values, you're trying to find a solution. And it can be very difficult at times to find a solution. Sometimes people offer you a suggestion, or here's what you do, you just do this. But they haven't waded through all the mess, all the stuff. And they often don't feel the weight of the decision. And that's, as I've said, like my beef with most leadership books is they don't talk about what leadership feels like. Right? Leadership is hard. There's pain involved. There's grief involved. There's fear involved. There's people's lives involved. And so if someone says, just do this, here are the 3 easy steps to being a great leader, like that isn't what it feels like. Right? So when someone just offers you a suggestion, just do this, but they haven't felt the complexity of the issues, their opinion tends to be less helpful. But according to Holmes, and I would agree, someone who does understand all that but finds a way through the mess, that input, that suggestion, that wisdom is invaluable. Once we've laid out all the issues, what is the way through? It can be hard to know. But simple answers in the midst of all that are a gift. Hopefully, that's kind of the context that I want to set up as we talk about this. Again, Jesus has been warnings about the challenges of the Christian life: rejection, persecution, betrayal. And then he's warned us about the threats from within, the things. So there's external threats. If anyone's ever done a SWOT analysis, there's external threats and internal threats. What are those things inside us that are good and bad, and what are those things outside of us that are good and bad? So there's external threats, things like rejection, persecution, betrayal, and there's internal threats. These threats to my spiritual life, my Christian life. I might deny what God is doing and just say, nope, that wasn't God. I just deny that. I've seen what he's done, and I just reject it for whatever reason. My own hypocrisy. We often blame the church, my lack of faith or my distance from the church on other people's hypocrisy. But what are my own? What are my own hypocrisy? The things in me that don't make sense and don't line up. And you might say, well, I don't like that. You're all hypocrites. On some level, we've got to be honest, there's some things in my life that don't match up, right? It just, we've got to recognize that is what Jesus is doing as he makes us in his image, is he's moving us towards more in alignment with him. So our behavior and our values, our behavior and his teaching begin to match more and more. So hypocrisy is a reality. Do I think you're all bad people? Nope, only one of you. Just kidding. I don't know. Just me. But we have to recognize that there's inconsistencies in our own hearts and minds. That's there. So our own hypocrisy can be a threat to our spiritual lives. And our skepticism. And it isn't about not using your mind. God gave you a mind to use. Use it. That is a gift, right? We're supposed to use our brains in how we interact with the world, how we interact with the Word, how we interact with each other. And the Lord, all that is a way that we can worship. We can love the Lord our God with all our minds, right? But if I approach everything just negatively, right, that's probably bad, or that person probably doesn't have anything to offer, or that person is whatever, or that situation, then that skepticism is going to hurt me, and it might hurt others. It might keep other people from enjoying what God has. So those are some threats from within that we've been talking about. Today we're going to talk about a few more threats, those things in our lives that try to weaken and destroy our faith. And we're going to cover some parables, as I said. Jesus spoke in parables. It says in Matthew 13:10, then the disciples came to him and said, "Why do you speak in parables?" And there's a few reasons given. He says in Matthew 13:16, "Blessed are your eyes, for they see, and your ears, for they hear." He speaks to those who are ready to hear, ready to put the work in, I think is part of it, right? I'm going to tell you something, and you're going to think about it. You're going to reflect on it. You're going to meditate on it. You're going to put the work in you, and that will show if you're ready or not to hear and to listen, to see. 60% of the Bible is story. Stories are how we learn things. We all know that math is a terrible, abusive subject, right? Inflicted on children, has no bearing on real life. Just kidding. I have a friend who's a math teacher, and he teaches high-level math, and students always ask, like, am I going to use this in real life? And he'll often say, probably not. That's not what the point of this is. The point is to learn how to solve problems. So I appreciate his honesty. Math is hard, but how do we teach math? Often with story problems, right? Let me try to apply this to real life. So stories help us learn. And they're really good stories, those really good folk tales, fairy tales, those myths from our lives. The boy who cried wolf, right? Things like that. Those things, they stick in our brains, and we find ways that they help us make sense of certain situations, right? In the midst of it all, I don't know what to do. Oh, the story comes to mind. So Jesus tells us stories to help us learn and help us to understand. So let me look at what's called the parable of the sower, Matthew 13:1-9. Let me read this. That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea. So he's probably in Capernaum where he lived. And great crowds gathered about him. So he got into a boat and sat down. And the whole crowd stood on the beach. And he told them many things in parables, saying, a sower went out to sow. And as he sowed, some seeds fell along the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground where they did not have much soil. And immediately they sprang up, since they had no depth of soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. And since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell among thorns, and the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, some 30. He who has ears, let him hear. Like, are you ready to hear what I have to say? Listen to this. And he's using kind of farming analogy because these people would have understood that. Well, then the disciples, are like, why are you saying it like this? Make it easy for us. Just give us 3 easy points. And he explains the parable later on in the chapter, verses 18-23. Hear then the parable of the sower. Boy, I'm struggling with those. Parable of the sower. When anyone hears the words of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches away what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the word, but the cares of the world and deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, in another 30. So he lays it out for his disciples. This is what I meant by all of that. There's a seed that falls on the path. When someone lacks understanding, the evil one comes and steals the seed of faith from his heart. We've seen this. You know people who just, for whatever reason, the message, the gospel, the good news of Jesus that we all do need to hear just doesn't sink in for some reason. And so they pass through. They aren't ready for it. The ground isn't ready. With the rocky ground, the message is received joyfully. Like, I'm excited about this. Yes, I'm in. But then all those things that we've been talking about, persecution, the rejection. Maybe you go home and you're excited about your new faith and your family mocks you for it. We've had people in our church who come from different kind of spiritual backgrounds, different denominations or whatever, and their families have a very hard time with them being a part of our church or being part of one of our baptisms. So that can be a rejection. Like your family believes similar things, but different enough to feel threatened by that. Now, many of those folks have continued to be a part of, it was about building our church, but they've continued to be a part of our church and let their faith grow. But that might be one way that people have experienced rejection. I was part of one faith tradition and I switched. My family rejected. Some we know are people who they didn't grow up in a Christian home, they become a Christian, and their lives are going so well now, and their family feels threatened by that. And so they leave. They give up on it. He speaks of thorns, the deceitfulness of riches. These are the joys of life that can distract us from what God is doing. They might not be bad things. Life is full of great opportunities. Even though Jesus lived a hard life, I think I grew up with these old people, which is 40 or so and up. So there's like a few of us. Remember the pictures you'd get them in all the Christian bookstores of Jesus laughing? Remember that? It's like, oh, that's just what he looked like. We have no idea what he looked like or what he looked like laughing. He might have had a weird laugh, right? Right? He maybe had a weird laugh, right, Maddie? We're there. So maybe he had a weird laugh. We don't know, but we saw this and we got so excited about it. I think Jesus enjoyed people. The story of him with children, he kind of confronts people. Anyone who keeps people these from coming to me, it's better that a millstone be thrown on your neck. All that stuff. I think Jesus loved children. I picture that story happening outside of his home. It wouldn't have been a sidewalk. In my version, there's a sidewalk, and he's like on the ground, and he's playing with kids, and they're climbing all over him, and they're just enjoying Jesus. I picture Jesus like that. I think he enjoyed life. But sometimes when things are going well, we begin to not need Jesus to sustain our hope or our joy, right? Things are fine. So I begin to put my hope and my confidence in the things that my job have provided or whatever. And so Jesus warns us that sometimes the good things in life can keep us from enjoying God. Rather than remaining thankful, thank you for all these good things. Thank you for this time of peace and rest in my life. We put our hope in that or in ourselves, and we begin to lose faith. This is the stuff, or at least some of the stuff of life. Sometimes we don't understand things. Sometimes life gets hard and we give up hope. And sometimes life is good and we forget who gave us life in the first place. And then sometimes we're good soil and things are able to take root. I don't think we need to look. This is a story Jesus is telling to make some points. We need to remember that. So I think sometimes we can go really deep on some things and try to find things that aren't there. One thing that isn't there in my mind is permanence. Once rocky soil, always rocky soil. I don't think that's true. I think if that's true, Jesus wouldn't have bothered coming. He wouldn't have bothered talking to the same people. He wouldn't have recruited the disciples he recruited. Because those are knuckleheads, right? So I don't think we have to worry about that. Well, I brought my friend to church and they didn't seem to care, it didn't seem to take, and so I'm not going to bother. I don't think that's what Jesus has for us or for that person. I think things can change. Sometimes we're not ready. Because note the sower in this story. Jesus is, of course, the sower. He's the one that is putting seed all over the place. How wasteful is that? Like, what farmer is going to take the seed, which is an expense, and put it on ground he knows will not receive the seed? You don't do that. You save it for good soil. You take care of it. That's your livelihood. That's the livelihood of your family and maybe many people, right? This sower in this story, Jesus, is incredibly wasteful, incredibly reckless, incredibly hopeful. He knows that the heart is hard, but he still gives them a chance. He still wants them to hear. I think the sower in the story is important for us. We often, even us religious folk, kind of become humanists in a way. Like, see, it's all up to me. And I do think we have a choice in the matter. I do think so. But Jesus is doing everything he can to give every one of us, to reconcile all things to himself, he says. I come to reconcile all things. So he is working overtime to give us a chance to receive what he's offering. The parable of the weeds is similar. We move further down in Matthew 13. I'll read this to you. He put another parable before them, saying, so this is Matthew 13, 24 through 30. The kingdom of heaven may be compared to a man who sowed good seed in his field. But while his men were sleeping, his enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. So when the plants came up and bore grain, then the weeds appeared also. And the servants of the master of the house came and said to him, Master, did you not sow good seed in your field? How then does it have weeds? He said to them, An enemy has done this. So the servant said to him, Then do you want us to go and gather them? But he said, No, lest in gathering the weeds you root up the wheat along with them. Let both grow together until the harvest. And at harvest time I will tell the reapers, Gather the weeds first and bind them in bundles to be burned, but gather the wheat into my barn. We won't cover everything that this parable is addressing, but Jesus comes to plant good seeds, to build his kingdom. But along with the things in our own hearts that work against what he's doing, there is an enemy working against him. We like the idea of the enemy out there. Often the enemy out there is a person who disagrees with us. And that isn't really most of what Jesus is talking about. Most of what he's talking about is this enemy, it's a spiritual battle. There's an evil one with his army trying to steal, kill, and destroy. And that can sound like mythical language, and I get that. But then when I look around, I think that feels pretty true. That feels pretty right. There seems to be an evil game afoot. And Jesus is working against this enemy. But to give people the best chance possible, he's patiently waiting. There will be a judgment, but Jesus is ever hopeful in these stories. So we're talking about these struggles in life, right? In spiritual life specifically. Well, what do I do about it? What's the answer to that? Well, I'll give you 3 easy steps, right? The antidote for these woes, for these warnings, these distractions, is where we began. Keeping the main thing the main thing. Back to Matthew 13, 44 and 45 and 46. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy he goes and sells all that he has and buys that field. The kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and bought it. The kingdom of heaven, the good news. Jesus' way of living, Jesus' way of viewing life, viewing your friends and your family, viewing yourself, viewing eternity. This way of living is the most important thing. There are other important things. Life is full of lots of things. But we have to have something that helps everything keep going in the right direction. What is the most important thing? That value, that ethic, that moral, that idea around which everything else revolves. It's the kingdom of heaven. And as we grow up in our faith and have a better and better idea what Jesus means about that, by that, what his life was like. Again, we can read certain passages and certain teachers will tell us it means that your life is going to be abundant and full of, like if you want a pony, just get a pony. You get a pony. You want a Ferrari, you get a Ferrari. Jesus rode a pony that he didn't own and he didn't drive a Ferrari. So those are unbiblical. Or the, first century version of that. At times he was homeless. At times his friends betrayed him. What keeps you going? I've said this before. Occasionally I've asked people who are farther along in their journey with the Lord in life, what keeps you going? For the ministers, it's been things like Jesus called me, and he hasn't changed his mind, and so I'm going to keep coming back. because the creator of heaven and earth called me. For me, it has often been, even though I've been a Christian most of my life, I have a pretty good idea of the trajectory of where I was going without Jesus. Do I wish I was a better person, more whole person, more like him? Absolutely. Do I think I would be a mess without him? For sure. If I were alive, I think I would be a total mess. I have an idea of what I might be like without him. So when I feel like giving up, when I feel like nothing's working, when I feel tempted to try something else, because that's often what we do, right? Like life doesn't seem to be going our way, and so we'll try something different. And there's room for that. But Jesus is telling us this. The kingdom of heaven is the most important thing. So often many of us have had bosses or coaches who help remind us of this, right? Like, I just don't know what to do. It's not working. We're going to keep doing what we're doing. We're going to focus on the plan. I'm assistant coach for cross country, so we just had our first week, and we got a lot of freshmen who are like, are you serious? Like, yeah, we're going to run some more. That'll be fun. And then after this, what's after this, coach? More running. Right? And then we're going to do some sit-ups, and then we're going to run some more. It's going to be great. And they're like, seriously? And so there's just a lot of like deer in the headlights. Like, seriously, more running? Are you nuts? And of course, the head coach, he won a 60-mile race this summer, so he's fast. So he's let's go. The coach's job is to keep those athletes moving, keep them hopeful, keep them trusting the process. And all the returning athletes kind of know, yep, the first couple weeks are really hard, but it pays off. And so when life gets hard, doesn't seem to be going our way, and it may mean I've got to change some things and put them more in alignment with Jesus. But if I can keep the main thing, if I can keep my eyes on Jesus, I'm more likely to be good soil, to allow him to continue to change me and to make me more like him. Well, there's a couple more parables in this chapter that I think are relevant. He said, and I don't have slides for this, he says things like this: the kingdom of heaven is like a mustard seed. Just this tiny seed that becomes a huge tree, and many birds can come and get shelter and rest on it. And the kingdom of heaven is like a little bit of leaven. Just a little bit can turn flour into bread. Just a little bit. Just a little bit of the kingdom can make all the difference. Just a little bit of faith. Can you trust me a little bit? And let's see what we can do. Can you give me a little bit of your life, and let's see what changes we can make. A little bit makes all the difference. The gospel and the difference it makes is contagious. As we begin to change and our lives become more like his, as we live differently, people are like, what's that about? That's weird. Why do you give so much time away? Why do you give so much money away? Why are you kind to people who are weird or smelly or whatever it might be? Because Jesus says, I'm among the poor. So if I want to serve Jesus, I've got to serve people like that. Well, that's weird. Why would you do that? Because of Jesus. That's interesting. The earliest church grew because people just lived differently. The more you get to understand Roman and Greek culture and the Roman and Greek religions, you see how profoundly different the Christian community was. People are like, well, that's weird. One difference was that when you came to church, you'd have all the societal structures there, but inside the church, they're all equals. There's neither male nor female. There's neither slave nor free. There's neither poor nor aristocrat. There is just brothers and sisters in Christ. Well, that doesn't make any sense. Clearly, these people are better than these people. Last summer, some of us went to Thailand, which is a Buddhist country. And their king went to school in Europe, college in Europe, and still lives quite the party lifestyle. And everyone knows this. But look at all he has. He's one of the wealthiest people on the planet. He's attained nirvana. Clearly, that's the best thing there is. Nope. So people want that, but then they see Christians treating people equally. Well, that's weird. Why would you do that? Well, because of Jesus. Because Jesus knows what it's like to suffer. Jesus knows what it's like to struggle. He is a king that stepped down off the throne to live a life like this with people like me. And I want to be like that. And just that little bit begins to change people's hearts. Jesus only needs a little bit of us to do something great. So how do we keep the main thing the main thing? Like, that's a neat, and I don't often use snappy quote, main thing, I don't use snappy anymore. But I don't use quotes like that, or, that's not how I think. But how do we keep the main thing the main thing? Right? We can't just say that. Well, I'm going to do that from now on. Yep, Kingdom of God, it's a pearl. Cool. Got it. Put a little note on your dashboard. So when you're about to yell at some driver, it's a pearl. It's a pearl. It's a pearl. That's not what we're looking for, right? So how do we keep the main thing the main thing? Well, I think it's good to look at what the first church did, the first churches, the earliest church. And we don't have a clear picture of what those services look like. Probably not totally different from this. There will be some differences, of course. Some of those were cultural, but how did they react? And the idea being, in my mind, is those churches were planted and started and led by people who knew Jesus personally. Right? So I think that's a good place to start. Like, okay, first generation or next generation, like what did they think Jesus wanted us to do? Did they get it all right? Absolutely not. So we see a model of how to disagree and how to work it out. But what did they do? Acts 2, 42 through 47 gives us a clue. I'll read a couple verses from that. In 42 and 44, it says they remained faithful to teaching, to fellowship, to sharing resources and prayer. So those are a few things we can focus on. How do I keep the main thing the main thing? Remain faithful to teaching and fellowship. Starting there, I had a conversation with Nancy about this before church. Just on Friday, Michelle and I were talking with some friends. And you said, was it like 45% of Christians don't go to church? Something like that. This is important. Coming together. It isn't about hearing me preach. It isn't even about worship. It's about the whole thing. Right? Sometimes I've been in church and it's like the service itself, this stuff is like, that is not what I needed. But I got to see a friend. And that friend encouraged me. Or as service ends, we'll have people in prayer in the prayer room. So that's what I needed today. And there has certainly been anyone who's preached often has had people come up to him and said, how did you know that's what I needed to hear? Because Jesus has allowed me to read your mind and read your diaries, and you're a bad person, and so I wrote this message for you. That's how. No, because we're just doing what we do, and somehow the Holy Spirit works through it. But we have to be a part of it. Sometimes people feel disconnected from the Lord, they feel disconnected from their friends, and then from the church, and they blame the church for that. Like, we haven't been around in months, so of course you're kind of behind on what's going on. But you're welcome back. Come merge back in. Let's continue fellowshipping. Let's continue doing life together. The early church shared resources. Right? They shared resources. Is there someone in need? Here, I have 2 of these, have one of them. Right? They shared resources. Why would you do that? The Greeks and Romans said. Why would you do that? Why would you give something to a poor person? They're getting what they deserve. Nothing. Well, no, our God thinks that person is worth dying for. In fact, our God identifies with that person much more than the king. Our God lived that life. He was a refugee in his own country. He had to flee his own country. So that's the God I serve. And so he wants me to be generous because he's been immeasurably generous with me. So they share their resources. People say, that doesn't make any sense. And they pray together. So they came together for teaching. They came together for fellowship. They shared resources, which means that they knew each other. They knew each other enough to know who needed what, or to be able to ask. Hey, I need some help with this. Can you help me? Right? And so there was a relationship there. There was time together. They did this to survive. Like literally to survive as Christians. They pooled resources, they gathered together, because under persecution, pretty quickly, they're being arrested, they're being jailed, they're being martyred. Martyrdom is not something most of us have to worry about, right? But when I look at what the early church did to survive, like, okay, this is pretty serious business. And when I look at the trajectory of faith in this country, it is diminishing. I think we'll bounce back. I do, but it is diminishing. How do we survive? We come together. These aren't mental tricks. These aren't emotional tricks. This isn't some kind of manipulation. What we see in Acts 2, they remained faithful to teaching, to fellowship, to sharing resources and prayer. And then in verse 7, what happened? The Lord added to their number day by day those who are being saved. By coming together, by iron sharpening iron, working together to follow Jesus more closely and live this out more fully, other people see that. They're drawn to that. They want to be a part of that. This is how the first Christians responded. It's their reaction to Jesus' message and mission in real time. They didn't do everything correctly, but they give us a model, a place to start. Worship team, if you want to come up. We're going to sing a song called Send Me, which is really about being sent out, being part of the harvest. Which brings us back to where we began this message. If we want this world to be better, which most of us do, right? There's things in this world that need to get better. And you can cast your vote for that, all that stuff. But the real change is heart change. And the real heart changer is Jesus. So how can I be a part of that? I keep the main thing the main thing. I follow Jesus. I live like Jesus. And how do I keep living like Jesus? I come together with other people who are trying to do the same thing. We fellowship, and we learn, and we grow together, and we help each other out, and we pray. So prayer team, if you want to go back to the prayer room, if you have something that you want to pray about, there'll be people back there for you to pray with. Maybe you're like, hey, it's time. It's time for me to take this a little bit more seriously, be more invested in this. It's time for me to come home. Or, I'm struggling. Can you help me with that? They can pray with you, whatever it might be. These are things that we do. And as we do them, Jesus can work in us, and he can change us, and make all of us individually and corporately more like his kingdom, and make the world a better place. So more people have a place like this, and ultimately, so there's less pain in the world. That's the vision. The kingdom of heaven would be more fully realized here. It's here, and it's not fully here. And we get to work with him, help him, partner with him as he builds that. So we're going to sing this last song. If you want to pray, I encourage you to do that. Let's worship.